Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, since the ObamaCare legislation was passed in March of 2010, we've been waiting for all the court challenges to reach a boiling point, which occurred on June 28th, I believe it was, 2012. And it was quite a shocker because the Chief Justice, John Roberts, voted and reasoned in a way that, well, conservatives just drop their jaw when they see his reasoning, and it has major impacts for the pro-life movement. And today we're very fortunate to have Professor Hadley Arkes, who is the John Ney Professor of, I'm not sure what, up at Amherst College. I apologize. But he knows some of these Supreme Court justices and would like to get his thoughts on how this all came down and what he sees as a good reasoning and perhaps bad reasoning, and where do we go from here from the pro-life movement. And also, does this affect religious institutions in our society? Well, welcome, Professor Hadley Arkes.
Oh, thanks, Brendan. It's good to be here with you. And I was just in Amherst myself, just doing some work in our house for a couple of days, and I have to check in to find the American consulate in Amherst when I get there. It's a place in America, but not quite of it. Well, this decision, of course, it jarred us, but some of us were getting some early warning signs that I ran into a couple of friends on the court, and one of them seemed to be quite depressed. And the word was getting around that the conservative judges were looking rather downcast and depressed, and the liberal judges were looking buoyant. And so some of us took that as an early warning sign to brace ourselves. The concern was that it was going to, if there was a flip to the other side, it would come from Justice Kennedy. After the oral argument, everyone was betting that it would go down, that the court would strike down the mandate that required everyone, even young people, to buy insurance as the only way of funding this incredible scheme that would oblige the insurance companies to cover everyone, even people affected by a pre-existing condition. But it's curious, your question made me recall that just a couple of months ago I was giving a talk at the law school at Harvard. I was having dinner with one friend at the law school and a federal judge, and we're not sure about how Justice Scalia was going to vote on that case. It was an open question, because Scalia, along with the other judges, conservative judges, have kind of confirmed over the years the main lines of jurisprudence that came along with the alteration of the Commerce Clause, and so he's helped confirm that line of jurisprudence, say in the cases dealing with marijuana in California, that it's a federal function. We can't have any, it may be a small plot with marijuana, but anything grown there could be drawn into a larger national network. It was entirely conceivable that Scalia could take the argument that, look, the main lines of jurisprudence have been in place. Conservative judges have helped to confirm that line of jurisprudence. So this is political now. If you people want to take on the political task of defeat, you're going to have to do this politically. Don't come to the judges to do your political work for you. So it was entirely conceivable. I think one of my couple of commentators, Ed Whalen at the Ethics and Public Policy, confirmed the point that we wouldn't have been astonished to have seen the same result coming with Scalia giving the decision. But after the oral argument, it was quite clear that Scalia was quite critical and quite dubious about ObamaCare, and it was likely to go down. So this real surprise came with John Roberts. But on this whole matter, it seemed to me that there's something not quite right about arguing this under the Commerce Clause, because given the extension we've seen of the Commerce Clause, that if under the Commerce Clause you could require people in the past with the Civil Rights Act to have commerce with black people with whom they didn't want commerce, requiring somebody now to buy a product did not seem just all that much of a stretch. I would have preferred, I don't know, do you have room for this? I would have preferred a different angle on the case altogether. Do you have a moment for this, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
When I was at Harvard, I pointed out that often we try to argue against the Commerce Clause and people won't accept the argument, but when we show them it works against their side on abortion, suddenly people change overnight the jurisprudential theories of a lifetime. The key case for the extension of the Commerce Clause came with a case called Wickard versus Filburn in 1942, where Roscoe Filburn, a farmer in Ohio, simply sought to set aside a portion of wheat on his own farm for the domestic consumption of his own family. And the court sustained the federal regulations that would overrule that private choice of his, that private autonomy. And the argument by Justice Jackson was that, that act taken by itself may seem innocent, but when it is aggregated, taken together with many other similar acts, it could affect the whole national production of agriculture that the federal government is trying to manage. I said, all right, let's take that. Now I can argue, apply that argument, I think plausibly in this way, and say that singular private abortion may be yours alone, but when it is taken together with 1.3 million every year, it is having the most profound effect on the volume of business in baby food, diapers, college tuitions, weddings, bar mitzvahs, to say nothing of 1.3 million taxpayers coming online every year to fund the system. I mean, Wickard versus Filburn would work just as well to establish the authority of Congress to regulate and bar abortions. And yet we know exactly what the liberals would say about this. My friend Larry Tribe, I surmise, would argue that it's not a matter of the Commerce Clause. You're now striking at deep matters of personal freedom. And when Paul Clement, the former Solicitor General, argued in one conference that he raised the question, can you compel me to buy broccoli for my health? And Mr. Keitel, Neil Keitel at Georgetown Law School, former Deputy Solicitor General, Mr. Keitel said, but now you're dealing with matters of privacy, private rights. Well, what I point out is that when the issue is posed in this way, and I submit to you that Wickard versus Filburn could be used to establish, under the Commerce Clause, the power of Congress to legislate to bar abortions. When we do that, the left and the liberals have no hesitation about moving entirely out of the Commerce Clause. Well, my argument on this has been, this is a matter of natural right here. What we have here is that the prospect of ObamaCare is a life-threatening measure. These systems of control invariably produce rationing. We find ourselves in a position in which the government, with the monopoly powers of law, can actually bar people from having access to treatment that's thoroughly legitimate, and they'd be willing to pay for themselves. I mean, I know a number of people in their 80s who are on dialysis, and if we're under the managed program in England, I gather they couldn't get access to it. So we have that. I would have preferred a different kind of an argument here. An argument based on the Commerce Clause I always thought was, kind of fragile, not really the best argument we could put forth. But in the meantime, what it did was convey to us that we're going to have to deal with this politically. Many pro-lifers could have thought that, okay, the court has gotten us off the hook, and many people who are nominal Catholics could say, all right, now I'm able to vote for Obama much more safely because there is no danger of this threat to religious freedom. But the threat to religious freedom is very much there. You raised that question because if they'd struck this down, they could have swept away this whole problem of the mandates governing the schools and the churches and other religious institutions. But that's going to be with us, but it's going to be with us even if it'll be with us as a prospect even if we could somehow repeal Obamacare, because if to the extent to which the government, really the federal government, gets involved in a critical way in managing the whole medical system, what comes along with that is the liberal premise deeply planted in the assumptions of these people that they cannot accept the definition of medicine or medical insurance or anything dealing with medicine that rules out as an illegitimate or unnecessary part of medicine the provision of abortion. That they take to be as a given. So whenever the government's going to be involved, national government's going to be involved in that, we're going to see the attempt to sort of push through this requirement of funding abortions, in removing tax exemptions or tax privileges from hospitals that refuse to train people in abortions or refuse to perform abortions. So this is going to be with us, and the only thing one could say at this moment is that at least it puts the rest of us on our mettle. We have to face up to the fact that this thing is going to have to be defeated politically by the public at large in voting.
Well, can I ask you?
I will let you get a word in on your own program.
What does and you may have broached it, but the severability clause was absent, wasn't it, from this piece of legislation, even though it was 2,700 pages?
We haven't looked through to find it yet. Yeah, right. It was absent. Right.
What effect? That was a contentious point. Was that ignored in this decision, or did Roberts kind of circumvent it or circumlocute?
Well, they didn't have to face it since they weren't striking it down. I mean, if they struck it down, for example, if the assumption was that if they knocked out the mandate, the requirement that everybody buy insurance, they were going to have to remove the part called guaranteed issue, the part that everyone who comes in to buy insurance will have to be given insurance regardless of any pre-existing condition. So if they strike one, they'll probably have to strike the other. The question was how much else in that intricate bill would be kept, because as a couple of people pointed out, it was the election of Scott Brown in our state that really created a real this monstrosity of the things put together in a strange way. In order to get the votes together, you had to cobble together these special interests, the Nebraska payback and so on.
The Cornhusker kickback, I think it was called.
The Cornhusker kickback. If once the central pin is taken out, it's good. How are these things going to get paid for, and how is all this going to hang together? So there are two schools on this one. If I myself was drawn to the idea that this is not the business of the courts to try to sift through this to figure out how they can salvage this kind of legislative construction, that the Democrats put this together. It was their Rube Goldberg construction. They put this whole thing together. They should be allowed to suffer with the problem of how to dismantle it and how to undo that contraption. As Mencken H.L. Mencken said, people ought to get what they want, good and hard. This is what you wanted. You're going to have to face the task of how to keep it together if your task is if you really want to keep all this together. But on the other hand, I mean, if they struck down the mandate and did nothing to remove all the obligations flowing to the insurance company, it was going to be a grand mess, because these insurance companies could be either pushed to the edge of bankruptcy and needing a bailout, or they could just simply withdraw from the business altogether. So it was it was a mess to contemplate. So I think the betting was that if the court was going to strike it down, it would not go for some notion of severability, that it would simply take the whole thing as a block and strike it down and save the Congress the mess of trying to figure out how the pieces would be put back together again.
Now, can you give us what was Roberts' line of justification of voting for Obamacare, and how do conservatives disagree with his line of reasoning?
Well, interesting. John was really drawing upon an aphorism convention long settled of drawing on Justice Story, the first Justice Harlan, Justice Brandeis, people on liberals and conservatives taking this line that unelected judges should not be flippant in just flying to strike down something enacted by elected representatives who bear direct responsibility to the people through the franchise. That they should try to even bend over backwards to find some way of construing the act to be constitutional. Of course, that rule is nowhere contained in the Constitution. It must be drawn from the deeper principle of rightful government being government by the consent of the governed. So you give a certain edge of legitimacy to the elected representatives. And judges who are not elected, you have that sense. They should try to do something to preserve the legislation if they can. On the other side, the dissenters, others of my friends here, argue that, all right, but if you want to respect what the legislature has done, you should respect the statute they have written. You should not be rewriting the statute in order to save it. Now, I think both of those rules, again, neither one of them is contained in the Constitution. They're drawing on a deeper principle about government by consent, that the rightful powers of government draw their powers from the consent of the governed. But if we understand that deep principle, then it should matter that when this thing was put forth, this Obamacare, it was not represented to the public as a tax, as a massive system of taxes. It was represented as something else. And you could say that if you really respect the discipline that comes along with constitutionalism, then you should respect that understanding of seeking the consent of the governed. My own inclination would be to just strike it down and tell them, listen, you want to try this as a tax, float it deliberately as a tax, try to do this and come back again, but you'll have to take the burden on this. Because remember, again, this thing was not presented to the public. Consent was not sought. Support was not sought. Votes were not secured for this massive bill with the understanding that it was a massive system of raising taxes. The President Obama denied that at the time, and he's denied it since then. So John Roberts really hasn't gained from this decision some willingness on the part of Mr. Obama to face up to acknowledging the very terms in which the court upheld the decision. Now, I just got back to Amherst for a couple of days ago, and one conservative friend, an economist, said, look, it is a tax. We've seen this in the past. As John Roberts himself pointed out, taxes have been used in the past for the sake of encouraging or discouraging things. In the first early Congresses, Congress passed taxes to lay special taxes on the import of slaves to make it clear that slavery was not a good thing as an object of commerce. It's been done in the past, and as my friend in Amherst pointed out, look, we have all these arrangements in which taxes are imposed, and then you give people remissions of taxes if they invest in certain industries, buy green products, or purchase a house. I mean, this at the national level now for years since the imposition of the income tax, we've had this alteration in uses of the taxing power. Now, John Roberts was actually coming close to an argument made by a friend of mine at Yale, Akil Amar, who was insisting all along, no matter what you call it, it is a tax. Akil said, it is a tax. Functionally, it is a tax, and because functionally it is a tax, the court will be on proper ground saying, it's within the power of Congress. So John Roberts was essentially making the same argument. It's not the argument I would have made, but as I said, I would have said if this is a tax, it should have been presented as a tax. It should have been justified to the public as a tax.
Did the other four liberal judges, did they have input, or did they talk very much about how it was a tax, or was it only Roberts writing for the one side, and there's one justice that writes for the other side? How does
they were as I recall it now, Justice Ginsburg writing the main opinion there was clear that it was a tax. It felt within the taxing power. John Roberts was claiming that the first part of his opinion was a part in which he was affirming the conservative side that there must be limits to the reach of the Commerce Clause. And Ruth Ginsburg made the point that if the decisive ground of the decision, the ground that finally assembled 5 votes in favor of sustaining the act, if the decisive ground was the judgment that this was a tax and it was being sustained as a tax under the taxing power of Congress, is that what it is? Everything else that that Roberts was saying about limits to the Commerce Clause was all, as we say, opera dicta, things that are said that are not strictly necessary to the holding of the case, and things which could be more readily disregarded in subsequent cases. So, the liberal side would have upheld this on either ground, either on the side of the Commerce Clause or on the taxing power. But they were also clear that since they were rejecting Roberts' line under the Commerce Clause, that there were not 5 votes for their position on the Commerce Clause, of course they had to hold that, as Roberts said, it was the taxing power that was the decisive ground for the judgment.
Mm-hmm. And we have a couple of minutes left. I was wondering how this impacts the whole pro-life thing. I know we're coming upon the 10th anniversary of some legislation that you were involved in. Is that correct?
Right. It was the so-called Born Alive Infants Protection Act to see if we can protect the child who survived an abortion, where a federal judge like Clement Hayesworth was insisting, no, we could not do that. This child in that one notable case, Floyd versus Anders, had survived an abortion, undergone a surgery, died. The question was posed as to whether the law could protect that child. The answer was no, that was not a child protected by the law. It was a fetus marked for termination, which is to say the right to an abortion is the right to an effective abortion or a dead child. And we could say, well, whatever you say about this, can't we at least understand this? The other side claims that we need to protect the child at some point, that abortion is not infanticide. Well, what about here? And of course, we never held back our own claim that, of course, we're going to push this back. We're going to ask you what is different about that same child 1 week earlier, 1 day earlier, 5 days, 5 months earlier. That bill was passed but never really enforced, and it would be a question for a new administration, a conservative administration, to make use of that bill, because it turns out to be one of the most powerful levers that could be used right now, because it turns out that this is a statute, and one could argue now that any facility, any hospital or clinic that houses this kind of procedure is not, as they say, in accord with federal law and could lose its tax exemption. And we find out that this so-called live birth abortion was delivering a child whole and putting the child in the refuse room to die. We thought this was really a rare procedure, but now from nurses calling in from different parts of the country, we gather that it's far more frequent than we'd supposed at the time. So this is something on the line. But of course, immediately we have this matter of the contraception, but the mandates on abortion and abortifacients and contraception. And the only way this can be defeated now, I think, is if, well, it can be, it's under some challenge in the courts involving the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. But the most decisive way of doing about it is to, I'm afraid, is to remove the administration that has brought it forth, that is determined to defend this as something absolutely vital. It's just an Obama administration is unthinkable without the defense of abortion at every stage for any reason. Mm-hmm. It is the most radical pro-abortion administration we've yet seen.
Well, Professor Arkes, time has come to an end. We really appreciate your insights. I know that you've watched this decision quite closely and understand all the undercurrents, and it's nice to get it out there to the public. I'm very appreciative that you were able to spend time today to be on the show.
I hope what I said was clear enough. Okay.
Well, we hope so. We're not going to have a quiz for our viewers, but we hope that they watch and listen and gain a lot of insight today. And we thank you for watching. We hope we found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.